Welcome to our adult class. We are in Revelation chapter 12. We will begin our discussion down about verse 10 or 11 in that neighborhood in just a moment. I want us to go back and just reflect on something that we discussed last week, and then we'll go forward. Verse 1 and 2. I want to read these two verses again, and we had some interesting discussion concerning who the woman was, the child, the remnant, as the chapter talks about here. Let me read verse 1. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth and pain to be delivered. And it goes on to talk about a woman, a child, and of course the remnant. And the discussion was that we didn't think Mary, because later on down in the chapter it talks about the great dragon that was cast out of heaven, that she went after the woman, verse 14, verse 13 and 14, and then, in other words, it just doesn't make sense. And a lot of different thoughts were presented, which, who represented the woman, who represented the child, and so on. I think we need to remember one particular thing, especially as I went back and thought about this. The whole book of Revelation is apocalyptic, right? Or at least this section. It's figurative. It was meant to be figurative. And I think sometimes I am guilty, and perhaps we as a people are guilty of trying to point out, say, well, that represents this and this represents that and so on. When you think about a woman travailing in birth, what does the word travail in that context mean? A woman travailing in birth. What is that? Pain, difficulty. Yeah. And every woman that's had a child knows the difficulties that comes from bearing children. And when you think about this as a whole, symbolically, what does it represent? A woman giving birth. And I'm not talking about, forget spiritually a minute. How would you describe that? What would be a key word there that would describe this event? Yeah, something new, life. It's a beginning, is it not? This woman is giving birth. It's a beginning. This child is beginning its life. And I think that's the whole issue, that it's the beginning. What's the beginning of? The church. We had the Mosaic age, which lasted hundreds and hundreds of years. And now, when Christianity came into effect on the day of Pentecost, Jesus began his public ministry at the age of 30. For 3 years, he preached and prepared the apostles, preached his message. John the Baptist, of course, preceding him by 6 months. And now here's this church in its infancy. As I mentioned last week, already going through persecutions from Rome in a limited sense. You remember how even Herod the Great tried to kill the infant child. And then later, another descendant of the Herodians, had James beheaded. Peter was about to be killed, Acts chapter 12. If you remember, where was Paul going, by the way? Whenever, the book of Acts ends. Where's Paul where? Rome. Why? Yeah, to answer his charges. Yeah, to answer the accusations against him. But it only gets worse. By the time the book of Acts, which the word Acts of the apostles, the events of the apostles during their lifetime of this infant church, we get a glimpse of how things are. And now the book of Revelation ends. John, the author, which we believe to be the last apostle alive, he gives this picture of what's immediately happening. Things have gotten much worse, if you will. So I think when he talks about this woman travailing to give birth, instead of thinking, well, this is Mary or this is Jesus, but how does Jesus give birth to the church? And then there's a remnant. I just think it's better if we view or interpret this as it has to do with the origin. It is the beginning of the church, this infant church, whether it be the woman, whether it be the child or the descendants. Again, I think that's what is being portrayed here. Maybe I'm wrong. Help me. Anyone else have a different view, or perhaps something that would clarify that even clearer? Yeah, Ted. That's my view here. It really is. And you said it more eloquently than I. Any other comment before we go further? Okay. Last week we stopped verse 10, 11 in this concept, or in this context here. Remember, I want to go back and help you if you weren't here, or even if you were, just to remind you, there is a battle in heaven depicted between Satan and his angels, Michael and his angels, verse 7. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was there a place found any more in heaven. Verse 9, and the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceived the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. All right, we discussed that last week, how there was this conflict in heaven, and Satan is cast down to earth. But is Satan idle? No. No, it's pointed out now, woe be to the world. In other words, Satan, while he's limited, he still has a great deal of power, and he's bringing these persecutions against the church, trying to destroy the church. Verse 10, and I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. All right, we discussed those two verses last week. But again, the idea that we as Christians, we have salvation through the blood of Christ and of the Lamb. And then he's going to go on to talk about, as I said, Satan now is coming after the church even more, even with vengeance, if you will. And I think he does that through principally the Roman civil government at the time. All right, those are kind of a recap of what we discussed last week. Any comments before we go further? Okay, let's read verse 12 down through the rest of the chapter, and then we'll come back to verse 12. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, and times, and half a time, from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God, and have not the testimony of Jesus Christ. So the Satan, the great dragon as he is depicted, is cast into the earth. And the middle of verse 12 says, woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea. The devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that his time is, that he knoweth he hath but a short time. Verse 12, there's a warning. John sees this, and as I've mentioned before, chapter 12 begins this new vision, if you will, of the same event, but these things that are happening. The woman in travail gives birth. The early church is here. There's war in heaven. Satan is cast down. Now we find here this warning. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth. Satan is coming upon you with his full fury, is the way I interpret this. Why? the latter part of verse 12, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. Why did he know he had but a short time? Yes, I think that's exactly it. And and later on in the next couple of chapters, we're going to read that power was given to Satan. In other words, Satan is a powerful being. I guess I should say it that way. But yet, he is limited. And I think he realized full well that he had but a short time to do this. That God was not going to allow Satan to be triumphant over the church. Remember Jesus in his promise in Matthew 16, verse 18, talking to Peter, upon this rock, upon your confession, I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. You know, Satan would never be allowed to overcome the church. But he had this, and it was but a short time. The only way I can think as an example, go back to Job. Did God give Satan abilities, or I don't know if you want to call it that, or certain limitations, certainly, in how he would tempt Job? Satan said, there's none other like him in the kingdom. Why, you've set this hedge about him. No wonder that he serves you. And what did God allow Satan to do? Yeah. Everything. And he did. And how many people would bow just at the children part? He didn't lose just one child. That would be tragic. He had numerous children, every one of them. Every one of them died. You can imagine the grief that would come upon him. Did he curse God? No. Satan is persistent. And that's when, take everything. Just spare his life. He lost, I'm convinced, his wealth, everything that he had, his wealth, his health. Sores, boils came upon his body. He had lost his wealth. He lost his children. His wife saying, Job, what? What did his wife say? Job, give up. Quit this nonsense. God is not on your side. Curse him and die. But Job didn't. And Job was an exceptional man. How many of us, would I? You think about all that you have. Connie and I watched this little movie last night about, this woman who basically lived in her van and yada, yada, yada. But the point being, how easy it can be that we lose everything physically. What if you lost your house? What if you lost your spouse? What if you didn't have any money coming in and hardly a means or a way of making money and this kind of thing? And not only that, but your health? To the point that, in a commentary I have, I don't know if I can even find it now, but it went through the book of Job and itemized the different things, the problems with his health. In other words, the boils, and talked about his breath and his just all these different things, how terrible it was. But Satan was yet limited. He couldn't take his life. Now, we bounce forward here to this century in the early church, and Satan has some powers. Tom. However, I don't know that I understand it all, but you're right. That's his nature. What was hell prepared for? The devil and his angels. And, of course, those who, rebel against the God of heaven and earth, likewise. That is the case. So here, Satan is, if you want to say it, he's given a leash. He's giving some, an opportunity, if you will, to really bring havoc upon the church. And I think there's a reason, as I mentioned last week. I think when we begin with difficulties, we learn, we grow from that. You take someone even physically today, as a young person, it's everything just handed to them, and they go out in the world, they don't know what, they never sacrificed, they don't know the meaning or the value of things. whereas a person who had to struggle and manage and pinch pennies, as we say, and I'm speaking physically here, they know the worth and the value of success and what it means. Perhaps that was one of the reasons that God allowed this persecution, not to mention the benefit of it spreading people out, taking the faith. But regardless, I'm rambling here, this woe unto the inhabitants of the earth. Why? Because Satan knoweth that he hath but a short time, and that's the idea. So what does he do? Verse 13. When the dragon saw that he was cast upon unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man. So immediately he begins to persecute the woman. Who's the woman? As I said earlier, I don't think we ought to try to, the woman and here's the man. The church, the early church, I think that's the idea that's being presented. The beginning of God's New Testament church. Mm-hmm. He did. God blessed him more in the end than he had in the beginning. That's true. All right. So, verse 13, he persecutes the woman here. Again, I believe the early church. Verse 14, and to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time, times, and a half a time. I think if you look back, and there's some evidence of that, to some of the other scriptures in the Old Testament, God often depicted help, if you will, as wings. In other words, to fly away from difficulties or whatever. For instance, Deuteronomy 32, verse 11, as an eagle stirreth up her nest, fluttereth over her young, spreadeth abroad her wings, taketh them, beareth him on her wings. So the Lord alone did lead him, and there was no strange God with him. There's other passages, 3 or 4 other passages, that depicts the same idea, depicting God's deliverance or his care as if wings that they could fly. And so it is here in our text that to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. Did the early church literally have wings? Did any man literally have wings? No, of course not. But it's depicted God hadn't forgotten his church. God was there to enable her to bear up under the pressure. So it says this woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle. She flies into the wilderness where she is nourished. And then it says this, for a time and times and half a time. 42 months. 1,260 days. So I think I'm right about that. This time frame is given in various occasions. And I don't think it means in its literal to the hour, to the minute, to the day. I think it's simply talking about a time period. You know, the early church is going to be protected for this time period. Satan is going to be limited. But these persecutions coming upon the church, as great as they were but for a time. We today don't have the same persecutions that the early church went through. I realize there's many enemies of the church. Who knows what our future may be, or our great-grandchildren, perhaps, even here in America, the way, things are going politically. However, the idea is, I think it was an encouragement to the early church. This is going to last forever. But God is going to provide this care. She'll be nourished for this time from the face of the serpent. The last part of verse 14. That's true. And I think that's where we need to have faith. Whenever, and I mentioned in a sermon a few weeks back, Joseph. Do you think Joseph knew when he was I believe, a teenager, when he was sold into slavery? Do you think he knew things were going to be brighter in the future? What about whenever, Potiphar's wife accused him of trying to rape her, and he's thrown in prison, and he's not in there just 24. What do they call that? 1129 or what? No. He's there at least 2 full years for something he never did. Do you think Joseph knew? Things are going to be a lot better here soon. I don't know, but they were. Yeah, Michael. That's true. Yes, he would be winning in the end. Think of Naomi. You remember the book of, was it Ruth? How Naomi, because of the famine, takes her children. She loses her husband. She loses both of her sons. She has no one. And even the statement is made when she comes back to her homeland, call me not Naomi, call me Marl. Call me bitter. The Lord hath dealt bitterly with me. That was her thought. And lo and behold, they're praising her in the end of the book. 3 chapters later, they're praising her. Things worked out. There was a rainbow after the storm. Individually, I think we can certainly make application and learn from that. That is the case here of the early church. God did not allow Satan to destroy the church, nor will he allow Satan to destroy us. Our faith must be strong. Well, very true. That's true. Verse 15. Serpent's not done. The serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. Do you really believe that happened physically? No, of course not. But it's depicted, this serpent, this dragon rather, out of his mouth comes a great flood of water, and it's going to destroy the woman. No. What happens? God intervenes, verse 16, and the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. Now, stop for a moment. I want to ask a question. What do you think, if you were the early church, many times meeting places had been driven into the very tombs where Romans didn't want to go? Today we go to a cemetery, we're above ground, that's where we bury our dead. Many times then they had underground caverns or caves where they would go down. It would be musty just from the fact of the environment. It was the tombs, and that's where the early church, I've read, often went to worship, to be with one another because of this persecution and dread and so on. As I've mentioned many times, their loved ones, some had been killed, some had lost their jobs and everything they had. When they read this, we read it as, okay, well, it wasn't literal, but here's the flood coming after to destroy the woman. God has the earth to open up and, take in this water that doesn't destroy the woman. What do you think the early church thought of this when they read it? Did it not, do you think, give them some hope? Yes. And I think we ought to continually remind ourselves, while we learn lessons, some of which we've already discussed this morning, from the book of Revelation, it was principally written as a comfort to those folks. And every scene, it seems like every chapter is a different thing. But yet, in the end, there's always hope. That doesn't mean some aren't going to die, some aren't going to suffer. Again, the souls of those beheaded before the throne, the Bible says, how long, how long? When are you going to bring vengeance upon these folks? But again, Satan's not going to be victorious. And that's a lesson I think was constantly before them. Verse 17, then I'll entertain any of your comments. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. So the dragon, Satan, I think is depicted, is angry with the woman. He went to make war with the remnant of her seed. So now we have the woman, the child, the remnant. As I said, I think we get in trouble when we try to depict each one as meaning exactly something here. Just view it, in my opinion, as the early church. But Satan is angry with the woman. The remnant of her seed, the early church, they're keeping the commandments and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Okay. Any thoughts, or perhaps a different view or something to add to this? Yeah, indeed. Well, Ted, were you going to make a comment? As we've already mentioned, Larry brought up some things. I think that is one of the great benefits of this book. I've had conversations with people who are literal, saying this is yet to happen in the future, and this talking about Russia, and this is China, and this is an atomic bomb, and this is a... And I said, no. And the question is, well, how does that benefit us today, this book? I think that's the key, is what you folks have pointed out. Regardless of what happens, and I think, again, my problems are small compared to what they went through, but there's still victory. I need to put my faith in this, and faith in God, because there'll be victory in the end. Before we go on, Ronnie, you had your hand up. Yeah, I don't think we have to worry about demon possession. Satan is limited in that respect. But does that mean Satan's not active? Oh, no. I know it in my life. You do yours as well, because we all face temptations and trials. Okay, chapter 13, verse 1. We have different beasts. Chapter 13 is going to talk about one beast, and then there's going to be a second beast. In my opinion, in this overall view, I think they're very closely related. But let's read about this. And before I begin this, remember these are different scenes of the whole thing happening here. Chapter 13, verse 1. And we're going to read down through, well, we've only got about 6 minutes. We're going to read, let's read several verses, and then we'll go back. And I stood upon the sand of the sea. Who is I? I stood upon the sand of the sea. John, yeah, the author. Remember, John is the one that sees this vision. I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his head and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. I'll stop at verse 6. Let's go back. Verse 1. I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea. And then he gives this description of the beast: 7 heads, 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns upon his heads. And the name, upon his head, the name of blasphemy. Who is this? Well, yeah, I think it is a representative of Satan. I think as we continue reading here, it's probably Rome, Satan working through Rome. But this much I know: it's evil. Okay, a beast, and then the last of the verse, blasphemy. So it's evil. That much we know. When it talks about, sometimes we read this having 7 heads, 10 horns, upon his horns 10 crowns, and we think, well, that's power. It is power. Yes, it is limited, though. It is not. And I think we do such a disservice when we depict Satan, even today, as some figurative, nonsensical being. No, Satan, I believe, is alive and active and powerful. Can he make me sin? No. I've taught that many times. The scriptures teach that. It's not about me. But no, Satan can't make me do anything. But Satan, I do believe, is powerful in knowing my weaknesses, whether it be the positions I might put myself in or put before me, or the circumstances of my life. And in those, put me in that, or allow me to come in that position, or whatever, to where I am susceptible to falling. The New Testament talks about the snare of Satan. As I've mentioned in sermon before, trapping, this kind of thing. Well, you have to know your prey. and you carefully, you, if you will, scout out this area, this path. Here's a trail leading down to the water, or, if you're trying to catch beaver or whatever, and that's where you place the snare, the trap. It's put in a special place. Does that mean the animal must go in? No, of course not. The animal could avoid that. But often they don't, and they're caught. They're snared. Same with us. So Satan is powerful, and I think he's working through the Roman civil government here, given the events of the first century. The 7 heads, the 10 horns. Many people have gone back and with great detail looked at the various rulers of Rome, the emperors of Rome and the leaders. I don't know, that very well may be the case. In other words, it's depicted each one of those. But as we read on here, I do think he's talking about Rome, especially when we get to verse 2. In verse 2, the beast which I saw was likened to a leopard, feet like a bear, the mouth of a lion. Now, when you talk about the leopard, the bear, the lion, what do you often think about? There's a passage in the Old Testament. All that is true, but I'm thinking of Daniel, the book of Daniel, where Daniel talks about some of these same characters, if you will, and the church would come about Rome, during the time of Rome. If you remember, he talks about, we could go back and read those verses here, but our class time is only have a minute or so. But again, Rome would be in existence when the church came to power. While Rome and all other physical kingdoms would fail, they would end. The kingdom of our Lord and Savior would last on forever. It does appear to me that that's what he has reference to. I think of Rome here in this context. Ronnie? Yeah. Right. That was the temptation, wasn't it? Well, yeah, the thought of it at least, yes. And when we talk about Satan, since you mentioned that particular example, what did Satan, now let me rephrase that. What did Jesus do prior to this great temptation? He fasted 40 days. Yes, and I'm confident, Larry, when I think of fasting, I think of just someone becoming weak, but I think there was a great deal of strength in that. Because fasting and prayer are so often connected. 40 days, over a month without food? And I'm thinking how weak he would have been. But we talk about Satan and his knowledge or his whatever. What was the first temptation he gave Jesus in this state? If thou be the Son of God, command that these stones be turned to bread. Satan knew he was hungry. And of course, Jesus responded, men shall not live by bread alone. Just as an example of Satan, as I said, being knowledgeable of the events or the circumstances. So anyway, so we have this beast depicted here. And it has the last part of verse 2. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Rome ruled the world for the most part, right? During the day. And I'm talking about a physical nation, a physical kingdom. And if you're here in one of these tombs or whatever, or you're a child of God and you're thinking everything is caving in, and you're looking at this vast Roman empire, this empire is forcing you to fall down and to worship the dictator of Rome, the leader of Rome, the emperor of Rome, and it seems like there's no way we can win. But that's not the case. And I think that's what this depicts as we go through this. All right, our classes are coming in, so let's, I may very briefly go back and just recap verse 1 and 2, but we'll start at verse 3, Lord willing, next week. Appreciate everyone's attention.